So your early days then, Lloyd, of like listening to your brother's stuff. But when did you start sort of when did your own ears start asserting themselves?
Oh, probably, I don't know, about 13, 14, maybe. I mean, I didn't start buying records seriously till I left school and went to work. So that would have been end of the 60s. Yeah, 1970 or so. 71, I think I left school. So yeah, would have started then.
What
And
was your first single? What was your first album?
my first album was Axis Bold as Love by Jimi Hendrix.
Oh man,
Um,
and
I couldn't tell you what my first single was.
I can say, and this is currently joined by a partner, Danny. Good to see you, Danny. Danny, Lloyd, Deborah, Danny, and Nigel. And so you got your early music influence like your brother, but so did you go like a lot of live music and stuff, or I mean, were you into your music at that young age?
Well, later on, I mean, not at a young age, but I mean, it was great because I lived in Hornsey,
Yeah,
North London, and practically walking distance from what was Finsbury Park Astoria
yeah.
before it became the Rainbow. And that was great. I mean, the first big show I saw was, I think it cost 1 and 9 or maybe 2 bob to get in.
That's
And
10p
it
and
was
yeah.
Stevie Wonder opened the show. He was right at the bottom of the bill.
Oh,
Then Junior,
10p at least.
then Junior Walker's All Stars. Then oh, I can't remember. I might have been Martha and the Vandellas, but the Four Tops were top of the bill. They closed it. So that was the first big show I went to.
Did you find any subsequent gig disappointing?
No,
I mean, what a standard that was a good, but that set you going to more live music and stuff.
yeah, because that's what you did. Live music was there all the time, and you went to it. It was one of those things that bands, especially black bands, made their money off touring. Touring was the thing. That was how they, or any band really, they had to gig for a long time before they went near a record company. So they could all play live and used to go to shows. I mean, I've seen some absolutely incredible shows at the Rainbow when your story when it became the Rainbow. And back then, you would be disappointed if the live shows sounded like the album you wanted. Bands put on a show. It was always they'd do something different. They'd extend version. They'd be more instrumental stuff because they were bands as well most of the time. So no, live music was great. It really was.
Yeah. So, how did you become like into? How did the journalism enter your life? How did you become a journalist?
Huh. It's just kind of ridiculous. I was a music fan. This would have been getting on towards the end of the 70s. And me and my mate were big Parliament Funkadelic fans. So my mate was a printer and he used to do the printing for Pi Records, which had Parliament. Parliament were on Pi Records.
Yeah,
And his firm did their printing. So he knew what press releases were going to say and all that because he printed them. And he told me that George Clinton was going to review the singles at Blues and Soul magazine on, I think it was like the next week or something. So I said, great, let's go up there, hang about outside, see if we can meet him. So we did. And I don't know if anybody remembers a shop called Contempo Records.
yeah,
It was in a tiny alley just off Oxford Street
yeah.
called Hanway Street, above a bar called Bradley's Bar, which was no relation. It was called Bradley's Spanish Bar, and the bloke who owned it wasn't Spanish, and his name wasn't Bradley. But above that, on the first floor, was Contempo Records, and
Yeah.
above that was Blues and Soul magazine. So I was a regular in Contempo, so I knew where it was. And we hung about outside, and this limo managed to get round into this little road. George and his press officer, Tom Vickers, and a bloke from the record company got out. So we went over, me and my mate, who were just literally leaning on a wall, went over to shake George's hand and that. And George and his press officer thought we were from Blues and Soul, come down to meet him. the people from Blues and Soul came down and thought we were with George. So we went upstairs with George and spent the afternoon sitting in a room with him, reviewing the singles for Blues and Soul. And it went downhill from there, really. I mean, that was Blues and Soul. When George went, when him and his press officer went, we all went downstairs and they said, "Why aren't you going with them?" And we said, "Well, no." He said, "Didn't you arrive with them?" We said, "No, we were just outside, you know." And the editor, quite a shrewd bloke, thought, "Well, actually, these two likely lads, you know." He said, "Oh, I heard George inviting you down, you know, after the show and that, right? Look, any little bits you pick up, you know, would you let us know?" And I said, "Yeah, all right." So there wasn't really anything. But he asked me, he said, "Do you want to review some records?" Well, yeah, all right. I've never done it. I was a chef. I'd never done anything like this before. And what I was really, really, really surprised at was I reviewed these albums and they didn't want them back. I was just astonished, like, blimey, I can keep these, you know? So I thought, oh, that's it. I found my calling in life, you know, free records. And so I kind of went on from there. And I stayed in touch with George and his press officer, Tom. I mean, Tom, I still see Tom. I mean, this was nearly 50 years ago. I still, you know, if I go to Los Angeles, I stay in Tom's guest house, and if he comes here, we always go out to dinner. So, so I'm still friends with Tom, like 50 years later, and still run into George from time to time. But that kind of got me off. I went to work for Blues and Soul, and through somebody that worked for Black Music, which was a magazine in the same offices, I got to work at the NME. They took me onto the NME and just kind of went on from there, you know. Yeah, that was how I got into it, completely by accident. I had no intention. So I was quite happy being a chef. I really enjoyed it, you know, and that was me for the rest of my life. And until, you know, divine intervention from Dr. Funkenstein.
Yeah, amazing story. So, I mean, you got in music journalism. What was the next level up then? Like writing books. I mean, what was your first book?
I got fed up with writing for magazines. Once Q changed, because I was on Q from the beginning, like issue 2, I joined Q, and it's a bit like coppers, right? You get older and they stay the same age, and I got fed up with 25-year-olds commissioning me to do things and telling me what to write and telling me whether they liked this band or not. You know, I said, I've had enough of this. And it seemed to be, there was a phase when magazines were run by editors, and then it was us writers. We were in charge, you know, and then suddenly it got taken over by publishers. And the idea was not to please the reader, but to please the advertiser. So therefore, we were told, don't do this, don't do that, don't upset this, don't do that, you know. And I thought, well, the only way I'm going to do this is say to shift over to writing books, because there you're kind of in charge. You can do what you like, you know. And a mate of mine asked me, he said that his best mate, who was a commissioning editor at Penguin, said they were having a discussion. There's 2 white blokes, you know, posh white blokes, and essentially they said they're having a discussion that there's never been a good book about reggae written by a black man. So Matt, my mate, he said, "Do you want to write one?" I said, "Well, yeah, all right then," you know. And I'd never thought about it, but I thought, well, it can't be that difficult. I know some complete idiots that write books, you know. And so I had a go, and it was bass culture when reggae was king, because I went into it completely naively. The people, of course, I knew what reggae was, right? And I had quite a lot of reggae records, but I wasn't a reggae head like some of them, you know? I'm not doing them down, but, you know, I know people that could tell you what colour King Tubby's underpants was when he mixed a certain record. And I'm not like that, right? But I knew it. And I thought, well, if you're going to buy a book about reggae or any sort of music, you're going to spend, I don't know, 15 quid, I think, at the time on the book. You've got, it needs a fair amount of emotional commitment and time commitment to read a book like that. So you've probably already got a few records. There's no point in me listing records, which is what so many music books are. And what I wanted to do was write about the context. How did this music come about? I wanted to write the how and the why rather than the what and the when, because there was enough of that anyway. And I didn't think I was good enough for that because I didn't have like 15 different versions of a certain record, and I sort of couldn't care less either, you know? So I started writing about the context. Why did this? What was important? You know, how did this develop? And stumbled across a way of doing it, you know, because every book that had been written about reggae up to that point had essentially been the story of Bob Marley with bits on the side, you know, and I thought, I can't do that. So I took Bob Marley out of the story and gave him his own chapter. Bob Marley, because in my book, or my mind, right? Bob Marley stopped being interesting when Peter and Bunny left, you know. So I thought, well, I'll take him out, and then I can write this story of the people that actually made the music change, developed the music, and realized pretty quickly that it was sound systems. The driving force was sound systems. Sound systems owners, record producers, DIY culture. And so I told that story. And it seemed to work because, you know, 25 years later, the book's still selling 1,000 copies a year. And it's in, I think, 7 different languages. If you count American as a foreign language, and I do.
We do. So I mean, that obviously got you very heavy into the Jamaican culture. So,
yeah,
what did the idea come up about, like the London culture book?
Through my agent, a publisher approached me and wanted a book about different sorts of music that have found a home in London, you know? And so I kind of looked at that. Well, I signed the contract and got an advance. Then I looked at it, right? And I looked at it and I thought, there's
Sammy Khan who once said, like, when he writes songs, is it the words or the song? And he said, no, the check.
Yeah. Well, you know, it's not. I'm not a charity, really. But it was. I looked at it and I had a list of things because I had to knock up a proposal, and realised that actually what the publishing company wanted was a kind of list of, you know, when you get like a bunch of art students in Hoxton that add sort of house beats to Bulgarian zither music and call it a cultural phenomenon. And that was the sort of thing. And I thought, this is nonsense, you know. And I was looking at it from a cultural point of view, like I did with Jamaican music, and realized there was only 2 out of the 10 things I'd looked at, and that was Irish music and black music that had any culture attached to them. The rest were literally just music to make records. You know, there was no basis, no foundation. You know, and it's funny because I wrote the chapter about Irish music first, and I really enjoyed that. I met some really, really interesting people and was writing about a music that I knew nothing about. And this was a bit like bass culture.
Yeah.
I didn't know enough about the music to assume knowledge on part of the reader. So I was kind of learning and needed things explained in my own mind. And I think the reader appreciated that because I wasn't assuming knowledge in their part. And this stuff, I mean, we were talking about London Irish music in particular. And that's something I just found really interesting, you know. But then when I did that, and I thought, great, this is how one chapter would go. And then I looked at the other chapters and thought, well, actually, they don't make sense. I don't want to write a whole book about Irish music. However, if I look at black music as being not all the same, but coming from the same place, if you like, then I've got something here. And there's a book here, and very quickly, as I started planning out and drawing the structure, I realized that you looked at an arc of 100 years, say from 1919 up to, I think I wrote it in 2012, right? And I looked at the arc and realized that actually everything was the same, and it didn't really matter what the style was. The culture, the thinking behind it was the same. And I realized that, and I used to joke that Lord Kitchener and Eddie Grant and Jazzie B and Dizzee Rascal were all the same person. And the only thing that was different about them was the cut of their trousers. That Kitchener's trousers were up by his chest and Dizzy's were hanging off his ass. And that was the only difference. Essentially, they all thought the same. They all came from the same place. And I realized then that what I'd done with bass culture, but hadn't realized it myself, was the important thing isn't where a music ends up. It doesn't matter if it's jungle or grime or lovers rock or whatever. It's actually where it starts is the important thing. And all these things, all these musics were starting in the same place. They were starting with black people in London absorbing the influences around them and putting that into a music that they already had, so you're creating something that becomes completely unique. This wasn't really noticeable until, or talked about until Lovers Rock, probably in the 1970s, because jazz had been changing. There was a lot of calypso in jazz here and a lot of Ghanaian highlife in jazz here from black players from the Commonwealth on the London jazz scene. But because jazz has always involved it absorbed other influences. It wasn't really, it wasn't viewed as anything amazing. But when these men and women started making pop reggae, reggae that took in the sound of Philadelphia, took in Motown, took in the Beatles, took in anything you saw on top of pops, that was something else, and started writing reggae songs as pop songs with a pop structure. Like they weren't just carousel going round on the same riff all the time. They had a structure like with a bridge and everything. So that changed how things work completely. So again, it's absorbing its environment. And I looked at all this and thought, yeah, there's a bunch of musics here that could only have happened in London, couldn't have happened anywhere else. And each cohort, I'm not going to say each generation, but each cohort was slightly more London and less abroad, if you like. It wasn't a question of taking a Jamaican music and adding a bit of London to it. It was, we're now at the point where it's completely made up or invented or constructed to suit the London environment, because it comes from the London environment and not from anywhere else. The culture that makes it might come from somewhere else. For instance, grime, jungle, dubstep, drill, it all comes out of sound system culture, which was a Jamaican import. But that's the culture, not the music. If sound systems never got here, didn't exist, then grime wouldn't exist. It's as simple as that. But the actual music, the sound of music is now purely London.
So, I mean, in terms of this London dimension, I mean, what you described is a cocktail of different ingredients. I mean, what would be the sort of like the bits of London culture that make London what it is? I mean, your mind. I mean, what is this London thing?
Well, largely it's what you had was mainstream record companies that refused to believe there was anything remotely like a black British culture or a black London culture. It didn't exist. It had to come from somewhere else. It had to be Jamaican. It had to be West African. It had to be American. They couldn't, or no, not couldn't, wouldn't um, acknowledge the fact that black London existed in its own right, you know? So as a result, you had things like, you know, dreadful period of British rap that went on, I think, in the late 80s, where you had kids from South London pretending to be Americans on record, and nobody would do it. And what it was they were using American beats, American backing tracks, and they don't suit a British or a London cadence, a London way of talking. So it just sounded a mess. You couldn't rap or toast in a London accent without changing the backing because it didn't work. You know, I mean, you know, most toasting is set up for like roots reggae. You know, rap is set up for the first hip hop. It's not set up for how we speak. You know, and so that was a big step to come over. You know, the first person that did that properly was Jazzie, because Jazzie wrote his own music, and he wrote the soul to soul music purely to fit his voice and the way his cadence worked. So it worked perfectly. It wasn't, I'm going to try and adapt the way I speak or shoehorn, cram like my voice into an American backing. I'm going to write something that suits me completely. And it did, right? Smiley Culture did it with reggae. Smiley, Asher Senator, there's a couple of others that out of that Saxon sound system in South London that they made reggae beats to suit their London accent. And that's like a breakthrough. It's like, oh, we can do this. You know, this is how it works. This is the trick, if you like. And you look at grime, right, as an example, and grime, even if you take the vocals off grime, it sounds like London. It sounds like little scallies in a London street hanging out outside the betting shop or the chicken shop or whatever. You know, it's what you hear every day. And the music or the beats have been put together to that. That's the biggest London contributor to this. You know, it's not about taking influences from abroad anymore. It's about actually thinking it up for ourselves, which has happened, yeah, since the 90s, I'd say.
So you must have had a fascinating role because you're there in it, the scene, but also out of it as an observer. When did it sort of first hit you that there was this London thing emerging that you know, that was distinct from, you know, like bands, you know, some of the early soul, like British soul bands trying to do a transatlantic accent and stuff. When did it sort of hit you that, hey, we've got something here?
Probably Soul to Soul. That was where it worked because the successful jazz funk bands, they were virtually instrumental. They didn't have singers, they didn't have vocals, or like Light of the World or Beggar and Co.
Yeah.
They used chant vocals, which came out of London clubs, you know, so they could get around that, but they were just avoiding the pitfalls without adding anything to the mix. And Jazzie moved it on. He added it. He did that. That's probably when it hit me. And I think I started thinking a bit retrospective, you know, then thinking about reggae acts like Matumbi or Steel Pulse that they reconstructed reggae because they operated as groups and not as backing bands with a singer plonked in front of them, you know, and then the same backing band backs another singer and so on. They were writing songs in a group structure, and that was making a difference. That was making a difference to the sound.
Yeah. So it strikes me, I mean, what one of the key ingredients was confidence. That confident that I don't have to make out I'm Jamaican wannabe or you know, I am who I am. Yes, there's a Jamaican influence in there and stuff, but I am now this sort of new cocktail, different from my parents, and this is who I am, and I've got a right to be who I am. Is that sort of
Well, I think that came about with the London generation, if you like, because, you know, Jazzie's not Jamaican, Dennis Bavel's not Jamaican, half of Eswed aren't Jamaican.
Yeah.
I've only met about 3 grime rappers that are Jamaican, you know, so it's not all about Jamaica.
Yeah.
So that's naturally stuff is going to sound a bit different, you know. But as regards confidence, I think we're back to the contract business again, was when people realized that they could be successful at it. That's the point. It's like Lovers Rock, for instance, right? The so-called reggae establishment in this company, which was in the mainstream, was probably Island Records, Virgin Records, and I think there was another quite big one. And all they wanted was dreadlocks, spliffs, and sufferation, and blokes singing about how the man got his boot on my neck, right? And the idea was, well, the man ain't got his boot on my neck, and I still want to go out and have fun on a Saturday night, but I don't necessarily want to listen to Mud or Slade, you know. So the fact that people could do that, they had the sound system culture and the independent record distribution, the independent studios, independent record retailers, and make money at it and survive at it. They didn't have to be part of the mainstream. They didn't have to pretend to be something they weren't, you know. I mean, people used to, when I first did the Black Sound exhibition, we did it at the Black Cultural Archive. And I remember the bloke who ran it then was saying to me, well, what about the struggle? And I said, well, I ain't never struggled, you know. And he said, well, yeah, but what about the 70s? You must have been like involved in like fighting the system. And I said, well, no, I was too busy saving up for a Ford Escort to fight the system. And that's what life was like for 90% of us, you know, and definitely everybody I knew, you know. Yes, we were aware of there was problems. Yes, we were aware that old Bill was going to give us a problem when we went out, you know, and we kind of used to look at that. We'd be going down to Ronnie Scott's on a Thursday night, best club in London on a Thursday night, upstairs at Ronnie's. There's no night buses then, so we'd have to walk home from the West End to Hornsey about 4 o'clock in the morning. And old Bill was always going to give you a problem, you know, always. It was just something you went through. And we used to come away from, you know, having, all right, up against the wall, lads, you know, where you been, where you going, blah, 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 you know. And we used to come away from that thinking, we've just been to the best club in London. We've just heard the best music we could possibly hear. We've been, you know, met some girls down there, all of this, right? And the highlight of his night was harassing 5 black teenagers. You know, it's like, who's the winner here, for Christ's sake? You know, so that was how we looked at life, you know. And also, we're here, we got to get on with it. And it was really nice that Lovers Rock and what Jazzie was doing came about, that we can have pop music, we can be represented in, you know, the kind of essentially like 3-minute love stories in pop music, which is what Motown was all about, which was what, you know, what 90% of what the Beatles did was all about, you know, and we could have our own made by people that looked like us. It was brilliant.
So, I mean, the London's, how would you define the London music? Like, you know, you mentioned like you stay in LA and stuff, and you know, some sort of cocktail party, and they say, well, how is this London music different from what we have in LA? What would you say?
I wouldn't really, because they didn't understand reggae at all. I've never met a black person in America that understood reggae, just didn't get it, especially in the 70s. It just didn't make sense, you know. It was like, very funny story was Bob Marley. They desperately tried to break Bob Marley in America, in Black America, couldn't do it because Black America just didn't get Bob Marley. And So he thought, as this bloke he was one of the fellas who ran a reggae label in New York. I think I got to meet him when I was researching bass culture. And he's, a college educated white guy who was really into reggae. And he he said, well, Bob had such a trouble, so he thought he'd go and find the audience. So he booked himself into him and Don Taylor was his manager then, booked himself into the Apollo Theatre in Harlem for a week, right? Thinking, I'll go to the audience. And he said that when the curtain, the Wailers struck up, the Wailers band and Bob struck up behind the curtain, and the curtains opened, and Marley looked out and saw all the same white people that he'd played to in Greenwich Village had made the trek uptown, and he said his face fell, literally, that he couldn't find this black audience, So I never talked to him about reggae. They liked soul to soul, loved soul to soul. The funny thing was, English record companies thought the way for a black band to succeed in America was to be American or pretend to be American. And I always figured that's the last thing they want to do, because in America, they've got loads of Americans and they don't need any more, So the bands that were really successful were the ones that were just dead English. Jazzie's never anything other than what he is. He was never at all American. He was always North London Jazzie B, and they loved him for it. So, I mean, to tell you the truth, there was never that many conversations, because I think most Americans I know just didn't take English music, other than the Beatles and rock music, seriously. Just didn't assume there was any black culture, any black music, or most of them didn't even know there were any black people in England. So, you had to look at it that way. And it was just, they weren't conversations you had. I just felt there was much more interesting stuff to talk about, than attempt to sell them on music that I knew they wouldn't like.
Can I introduce Carleen and Danny in a conversation? Because you guys do your own soul nights, don't you, and stuff. Do you want to explain what you do? And I just wonder whether there might be some interesting things about what you do and what Lloyd is talking about, and the scenes he's been talking about.
Well, Lloyd, I love your story about the reggae. As far as my reggae knowledge goes, before I met Carleen, was UB40, and that was about my lot. So Carleen brought me up to speed on the reggae side of it. And,
not so much.
Yeah.
But
When I signed the contract to do bass culture, my editor there, Tony Lacey, a guy at Penguins, absolutely brilliant. Right? He's a lovely man. Unfortunately, he's retired. And he said, look, all I know about reggae is Bob Marley and UB40. Yeah. And I assume there must be more than that. I hope you can explain.
So your nights, Carleen and Danny, what do they consist of? And I mean, you've had some interesting experiences about people telling you about their favourite songs and stuff. And
yeah, so I guess you've been collecting music way longer than I know it from being brought up in a household with music. That's where my background comes from, music. But you've been kind of collecting.
I've been collecting music since I was about 13. I'm now just turned over 50. And Lloyd, you might know him, a guy called Gary Dennis. He's got a record shop, crazy beating up in stage, very big on the scene. He buys records all over the world. And I had a Saturday job when I was at school. And I worked with a guy called Gareth Donovan, who still plays on Stomp Radio. And he's best friends with Gary Dennis. And I got introduced to his record shop when I was about 14, and I still go in there to this day, and I just buy one or two records here and there. Wherever I go, I love buying vinyl. Always have done, always will. And then, as the world evolves, we do a lot on TikTok, amongst other stuff. And we started DJing on TikTok Live, started as a duo, and you don't realise what one record can do for one person, let alone like an audience of people. That one record can take you back 30 years, 40 years. And it's amazing. And I'll do a little slow jam session sometimes. And I connect with music. Sometimes I have a tear come down my face. If I play a Luther Vandross a house is not a home, at the right moment, I will generally cry. And I think it's not only me, that music, it just touches people. It lifts you up, it brings you down, it gets you through situations. And yeah, so all their TikTok followers, it's thanks to Carlene that we started TikTok. And people was asking for a soul night. Carlene made it happen. So I DJ for about 7 hours. Carlene hosts it. Everyone else comes and dance, and it's just really just bringing like-minded people together through music. I think you could bring the whole world together through music. I think it's quite simple, really.
And any type of London music you play, I mean, and any London black music you play?
Well, I like Chaz and Dave, but they're not quite black.
Or Chaz and Dave might be a variation there, but but I mean, like, you have people like tell you the story about what the songs mean to them and stuff. Is that right? And
Yeah, they play a lot of 80s soul.
Yeah.
And obviously the soul to soul, the loose ends, you know, there's quite a few UK. Sure, my mum could pipe in there with some other artists. And we don't play so London music. We don't play the grime or the garage. That's my music. That's very much me. Not Danny so much.
That's not my cup of tea. I ain't gonna lie. Yeah.
But the soul music is very much what we play, and the people that follow us and that we've connected to and that always have a story is all soul music. All soul music.
yeah,
That's great.
yeah. Nigel, go away, but
Oh, Lloyd, just cut the two questions for you.
garage fan.
Sorry,
You're a big grime and garage fan.
not grime and garage so much. Ska, reggae, oh, that's more lovers rock. That's all right. Lloyd, couple of questions. First question: you mentioned high life West African music. Has that had an effect on London? And attached to that, do you remember OCB? They used to play everywhere.
Oh, remember them well. So oddly enough, I was just because we're putting this exhibition together. We got 3 boxes, Perspex boxes with different albums in, and one of them's the first OCB album.
Did you think that affected London? Do you think African high life West Africa has affected London music or not?
It was probably the other way around. I mean, it's an interesting point. I think you have to go back probably to the 40s, 50s, that a lot of people assume that Trinidadian Calypso was a descendant of West African high life. And in fact, it was largely the other way around. And it happened in London. What you had was good recording studios in London and people from the Commonwealth that could come and go as they please, because everybody had a British passport, right? Musicians would come to London because the recording was here. There was no recording industries in very little in the Caribbean, very little in West Africa. So they'd record over here. Records would get shipped back. And what you'd have is a kind of melange of it. One of the aspects of the exhibition we've called West Africa meets the West Indies in the West End, because that's what it was, you know. And it was like, I mean, essentially what happened, it came out of jazz. When jazz first came to London in 1919, the band that bought it was supposed to be here for about 6 weeks and stayed 3 years. But in that time, their members would go home because, you know, they've got a bit bored or wanted to do something else. Now, promoters and the band leader wanted to keep the orchestra going. It's quite a big orchestra, the Southern Syncopated Orchestra. And what they'd do would be absorb players from the Commonwealth, Africans and Caribbeans, and just palm them off as Americans because they was all black, you know? So naturally, these guys used to bring their own influence to the music being made. And that's why sort of London jazz evolved into this kind of quite unique thing, because it was taking in these influences from the Commonwealth, you know? It's an interesting thing that in the West End clubs, you had bands. Musicians used to meet on the bandstand or in the recording studio. It's the way musicians are, you know. Someone would say, I've got a gig tomorrow and they're looking for a trumpeter. Can you come along? You know, and so it would go like this, very informal, you know. And what would happen? You'd get groups of guys and a club owner when, I don't know, when say the rumba was the rage, right? You know, so you get a group of black guys that might be made up from 3 or 4 guys from Nigeria, a couple of guys from Ghana, 4 guys from Trinidad, a couple of from Jamaica, and they say, oh, they're all Cuban. This is a Cuban, genuine Cuban rumba band, right? Then they'd go to another club and they'd be a Harlem jazz band, you know, and it was like this. And the promoters could always, or club owners could always advertise them as, you know, the genuine article. And they put maybe, you know, put a couple of shillings on the price of the admission, you know. So this used to happen all the time, you know. But with West African music, so much of the music was recorded in London and shipped back to West Africa that it involved a lot of West Indian players, you know, and Trinidadian calypso influenced Ghanaian high life to a fantastic degree, going back that way, you know. I mean, there was a point where when Ghana got independent, I can't, if I could flick through Sounds Like London now, I could find the name, but I've forgotten it completely. Right? It's the president of the newly independent Ghana asked a London-based Trinidadian calypsonian to write the new national anthem for them. And he said no. He said, you know, don't be silly. You need a Ghanaian to do this. But that was the relationship between West Africa and the West Indies that happened in London.
Yeah. I just bring a conscious time, Deborah.
Sorry, I just realised I completely forgot what your question was. I just went off on some sort of tangent there, and I'm not sure if I answered.
Jazz conversation, I think, and yeah. But Nigel, you happy about that?
Yeah, I'm happy. Yeah,
Deborah, I mean, lovely to see you here. As I say, we met new friends from last Wednesday, and I don't know, from what you've heard tonight, Deborah, anything sort of touched a chord with you at all about what people have been saying?
Yes, because obviously I've lived in black music, and I'm a Londoner, so I was born in London, and yeah, so for me, that my whole life has been black music. No, to be fair, when I was at school, primary school, it was the Osmonds. To be honest, the rest of my family like Jackson 5. I like the Osmonds, and specifically Donny Osmond. But then after Roots came on TV, and that just smashed my brain to pieces. And then that was it. I was then into Coxon, Jar Tubbies, King Tubbies, you know, Studio One, British Lovers Rock, Aswad, you know, Black Slate, and I could Junior Mervyn. There's just thousands of people who did London or British artists, as well as Jamaican artists, but definitely British artists. And I agree with you, Lloyd, when you say it's not all in Jamaica, which I was so glad when you said that. I was like, thank you. A lot of people just think it all comes from Jamaica. So yeah, and because I've had 5 children, it's come all the way down through the family as well, with grime, drum and bass, jungle, you know, all of that as well. So we love rare groove, we love soul, we do love. I love British Lovers Rock. I think quite a few of my family love it as well. So yeah, the British industry was definitely going on, but it was all underground. Because a lot of what you're saying, Lloyd, some of them is that it's not that they weren't good enough, like you say, the industry just couldn't receive them because they just couldn't get it around their head that this is a good piece of music. And so, yeah, people just created their own music. We went to our own clubs and listened to our own music. That's really what it was. We got a lot of stuff that was white label. So it's been pressed somewhere in a studio, but there's no label because they're not signed by anybody. It's not, you know, it's not getting pressed by a legitimate. It wasn't illegitimate, or illegal, but they weren't signed basically.
Yeah,
So we had to do our own thing. We just had to do our own thing.
yeah, that was always the way, and 90% of the time that was far more exciting than, you know.
Yes, it was.
I mean, you know, Bluesville in Wood Green was always more exciting than the Tottenham Royal, you know.
Okay.
But yeah, I mean, that was the whole kind of underground economy, if you like. You know, that was run Lovers Rock. Some of those singles sold hundreds of thousands, but they never sold in our price or Woolworths or whatever. So there was no chart return on them, you know.
That's right.
One of the things I did for the exhibition just now is the Lovers Rock label. They couldn't get proper distribution, so they bought a Volkswagen camper van and kitted one side out of it with record shelves, record racks, and the other side of it was like accommodation. They had a guy, a white guy, who would drive up one side of the country in the beginning of the week, across the top and down the other side, servicing these little shops out of this camper van and collecting the money from records they sold last week, you know? And he'd come back, by the time he'd go down to the West Country, come back up, get back to London Saturday afternoon. He'd have Saturday night and Sunday off while they restocked the van, and he'd be back off on the road on Monday. And that's how they made their money, you know. Dennis Bavell, one of the guys who founded Lovers Rock, he told me he got this idea when, you remember Five Star? Now you're young enough to remember Five Star, right? And their dad, Buster Pearson, used to have his own reggae label. And Dennis said that he bumped into Buster in Tottenham one morning, and he said, "Oh, sort of, what are you doing?" And he said, "Oh, I'm just going on the road just for the day. Do you want to come with me?" And so Dennis said he got in Buster's car, and in the back seat was totally covered with record boxes, you know, boxes of records. And he went up about as far as Northampton, you know, stopping at these shops. They weren't record shops, most of them. They were like barbers or grocers or cafes or whatever, and dropping off records. They were anywhere black people shopped, right? And he'd drop off the records. And Dennis said he had this satchel around his shoulders. And he said that by the time we got up and we came back through Luton and back to Tottenham, he said all the records were gone and he could barely close the satchel because it was so full of money, you know? And he said, well, that's how I knew it. We couldn't get distribution. So let's try and do it a bit bigger than Buster and his car, you know? So they bought this camper van. But that was how it worked, you know? I mean, with the early Calypso records and imported African records or African music recorded in London, this guy who ran a label that launched the Blue Beat label a little while later, right? But this was before Blue Beat. And he couldn't get distribution, didn't know how to sell his records. So he went to fruit and veg importers in Balham called the Oti brothers, who are Ghanaian. And they imported African food that went to like the markets and grocers and that in black areas, black shops, right? And he said to them, you know, well, will you distribute my music as well? So he got his records distributed with the Yam and Green Banana and that, you know, and the records found their way to where people wanted them. And it's one of these things. It's like, it's sound system culture. It's totally DIY. It's like, right, well, okay, I can't go through that door, so I'll go through that door. Oh, I can't go that either. I'll dig my way underneath, you know, and they won't see me coming, you know. And I would climb over, but they'd see me. So it worked like that. And this is why grime and jungle and all that became so successful without record companies knowing what it was. I mean, you think like, you know, you're a 50-year-old Oxbridge educated, public school educated record company executive, and someone like Jammer or Wiley or Dizzee comes in with, you know, what would it would be on his phone, right? His recording would be on his phone, right? And says, you know, well, what do you reckon on this? And it's a grind track. They'd laugh him out the building, you know. It seems ridiculous. It makes no sense, right? But these guys, because they're one generation down from the original sound men, you know, they've all got like sort of older brothers, uncles, aunts, fathers, mothers that were in sound systems in the 70s. And they knew exactly what to do. Well, we don't need the record business. We can make money off this. All right, we're not going to be U2. You know, you need a major record label for that. But you can make more money than you'd make working in Starbucks and have a lot more fun as well, you know. So, and these guys knew that. So it didn't scare them. I mean, I think Andy said something about confidence. It's just, I mean, the first time I met Jammer, he told me this story about how it was quite a big record label, 4AD or something, had heard this tune of his that was really tearing it up on pirate radio. So someone managed to get in touch with him, invited him in, and he's got the tune and it's got artwork and everything. He's done all this himself, you know. And he said, well, yeah, we love it, but we don't really know what to do with it, you know. And he's thinking, well, you don't know what to, I thought you sold records. Isn't this what you do? You know, like, and he said, so he left it. And then about 3-4 months later, they asked him in again about the same tune because it was still blowing up. And he said, and Jana said to me, he said, and they offered me 10 grand for it. I've made 5 times that selling it out the back of my car. And he was 17 years old. You know, this is what sound system culture does to you. You know, it's like, well, I don't need the mainstream. I don't need the record labels. I can do it myself, you know, and they did. And
many of them learned from examples like Dr. Dre, Russell Simmons,
yeah.
50 Cent. You know, they're talking about doing it out the back of their car and what they did and what they were able to achieve and create their own companies, their own clothing lines, etc. So the ones in the UK, what I like about UK music is where they will be like, yeah, we can do that. We ain't got to copy. You know, you be inspired by you, but we don't have to copy you. We don't have to be you. We will be
it shows you how that it can be done. It's like, and the interesting thing about it is the British public, certainly, I won't say the same for Americans, right, is far more robust than the music industry gives it credit for. It's like, they're not scared. I mean, why is grime so big? Why is Skepta so enormous, right? Because it's actually what the public want. They want the real thing. They don't want it run through a series of marketing meetings or a discussion about the video budget. No. Slap that tune out there on pirate radio. If the phones blow up, I'll do some more like it. If they don't, you'll never hear from it again, which is exactly how Fox and Duke Reid and Buster did it in Jamaica in the 50s and 60s, you know, exactly the same. They did it on sound systems. In London, they're doing it off the top of tower blocks, you know.
I think what you've highlighted there is a Cockney dimension of it struck me like the ducking and diving bit. That streetwise is that street savviness that
yes,
you know, you take life on your terms, and you as Bob Hoskins' mum once said, if people don't like you, F them, they've got no taste, and just do your thing there. So I think
that's what it is, Andy. So people see us like, when I went into your event last week, you see a few people give a little second look, and it's like, why? We're Cockney as well. I was born and bred in London, East London. So to me, I am Cockney through and through. But because some people will look and think, oh, where if there's people from East, what I call East London anyway, Tower Hamlets, most people will get it, but some people still don't accept. And I think a lot more people are acceptable now, or accepting now, but it's just from the 70s, you know, I was born in the 60s. So, but coming all the way through, you're still having to forever have to sort of introduce yourself. I am British, or I'm English. I tell people I'm English, and people still argue with me that you're not English, Deborah, you're British. I said, no, I'm English. I was born in England. I wasn't born anywhere else. So, you know, all of that is all part of like what you're writing about, Lloyd, which I'm really glad you've written your book. Yeah, we do need a lot more
But still,
about the history, the Cockney stuff, and also the sort of call it black music now, but you know, the music of people of colour. Yes.
Well, listen,
Oh.
a couple of takeaways. Sorry, I didn't say.
go on, Hannah. Go on.
Well, I was going to say, really, just a sort of a couple of announcements at the end, really. You've made buy his book, it's bloody good. B, you mentioned the exhibition several times, Lloyd, but we just need to explain where it is, how long is it for, and what it consists.
It's at the Barbican Music Library. It should have opened today, but we haven't quite finished putting it up because it was up in Coventry until last week, and we had to take it down in Coventry, drive it down in a zip van to the Barbican and put it up. And because we underestimated the time it would take, so it will be finished by lunchtime tomorrow, but that's fine. It's 100 years of British black music.
I just think this might be a little show for Carlene and Danny to pop down and talk about.
It's contextual as much as anything else, you know. You mentioned a record shop. Danny, you mentioned a record shop. We've one of the things we've done on this one, because this is the 4th time we've put this exhibition up. We've got a great big map of London. It's like, you know, the ones you used to see on minicab offices.
Yeah.
We've put in as close as we can, we've put pictures of well-known record shops around. There's about 24, right? That's kind of around the outside. And what we want people to do that go to the exhibition is, we've got like little labels and this sort of stuff there, is to write down what record shop you used to go to and stick it on the map where it was. And we're trying to build up this kind of thing, this map of black record shops in London.
That's a brilliant idea. That's a brilliant idea.
Is it open up every day? Is it? Oh,
yeah, Sunday. I think the Barbican Centre's closed on Sunday. It's the Barbican Music Library, which is part of the Barbican.
Yeah.
And it's open every day from.
Still web-based.
It opened yesterday or today. Sorry.
Tomorrow lunchtime.
It's on until the middle of July. So.
Oh man, that's all got no
plenty of time to get there, you know. So we tried to be as contextual as possible, you know. So the record shops, the other side of this wall that's on is music magazines, black music magazines that might or might not have been forgotten, and to tell the story of how the mainstream press covered black music to start off with. That's up in the top left. And then we had the specialist black magazines, and now we're back at a point where the mainstream are covering it again, you know. So it's that we got the Aussie Beast. We got 3 albums in their own little boxes. One's the first Aussie Beast album because it had a Roger Dean album sleeve. And Roger Dean was an artist who designed the original Virgin logo. He did a lot of the progressive rock album sleeves, and he did Aussie Beast's stuff as well, because they played a lot in these kind of psychedelic-y West End clubs, you know. So that album sleeve is a real work of art. It's just brilliant. And we got a Matumbi Seven Seals album in another one, because this was when record companies decided they had to spend a bit of money on reggae, and it's a really great sort of thing. It's got an inner bag with a picture and all of this on, and it's pressed in green vinyl, which is kind of interesting, you know. And the third one is this limited edition thing that Jazzie did for Soul to Soul, which is a really beautiful packaging, you know, a 3-way thing with a thing and a little, I think it's on a USB thing in there as well as the things. And quite remarkably, I'd forgotten all about this completely, but I have one. Jazzie gave me one, and I just had it on my shelf for, I don't know, about 5 years. I never opened it. It's still in cellophane, you know. And so I've undid this today and was putting it up, and I wrote the sleeve notes to it, and I've forgotten completely. I go, oh, blimey, these are good, you know. Oh, I wonder who wrote them.
Shows potential.
So there's that, and then we've got half a dozen display cabinets with different aspects of what it was. We've got like the kind of entrepreneurship aspect. We've got the pirate radio and sound system aspect. We've got the 70s and 80s and how big it all was then. We've got the original, what happened in the beginning. We've got a bit with the Southern Syncopated Orchestra. We've got a little miniature steel drum in there, you know, that where it all began, if you like. Then we got something that's kind of dedicated to modern black music, contemporary black music, and a soul to soul cabinet, because they were so pivotal in everything that happened and just stuff they did, you know. So yeah,
What are
we
you
got
trying to achieve with the exhibition, Lloyd? I mean, what's your goal with it?
what do you mean?
Well, you're doing a lot of sweat, a lot of effort, a lot of labour of love. But what is it you're trying to achieve with it, mate?
Keep the culture alive.
Mhm.
Otherwise it will die, it will go, you know. If it's not recorded, it will disappear. I mean, we're going to have, we did it in Coventry and it's a sort of work, so we're going to try it again in London. And we've had good response from like Radio London and stuff like this. Is what we're calling it is a Heritage Collection Day. We're going to have 2 of them. And what we're asking is Londoners to come to, on this day, to bring an object or an artifact that connects them to black music in London. It could be anything. It could be a concert flyer. It could be a pair of shoes you used to go dancing in. It could be a ticket stub. It could be a record. It could be absolutely anything, right? And what we're going to do is scan this in 3D, store it in an archive. But the most important thing about this is not the object itself, but whoever brings it, we record their story and why this is important and what it means, because these stories are important. You know, I mean, on the one hand, we're doing the sort of exhibition thing where we're putting up a bunch of stuff and people are looking at it and hopefully being amazed, right? But really, we want to turn it round and we want you to show us stuff and we will be amazed, you know. So that's what we're doing. And we're talking at the moment to do a deal with the National Archive to store it in there. This is all digital, you know. It's not, we're not keeping your thing, you know. It's like we scan it, you take it home, right? And we want the stories, really. The item is just a trigger for the story. So we want to build up. We've done it in Coventry and it worked well. We got about 100 different items, you know, and stories to go with them. So the Barbican have offered us this chance to do it there. If that works, what we want to do is kind of take it on the road and do it in different cities and towns. So we build up a patchwork of what people's experiences of black music in their lives was, you know, because it's a bit like war veterans, you know, they're nearly all dead now. And stories from the First World War definitely are gone. If you haven't captured them then, they've gone, right? And I'm looking at, you know, Teddy Ossie, the guy who's founded Ossie Bisa, he died recently. Our people are dying, you know, and this story, Russ Henderson, who's in Sounds Like London, he was a steel pan player. He's gone a couple of years ago, you know, and if we don't capture these stories, then there'd be no record of a very important cultural expression. It's not a culture in itself, it's an expression of a culture. So if these things, once they're gone, they're gone. And they're gone. I mean, I can't say anything more than that. They're gone. And this is what I meant about keeping the culture alive. It's important, you know. So that's why I'm doing it.
Yeah.
So
just
you have to let us know how that works, Lloyd, then, because I've definitely got, well, I think I've got 2 stories for you. One about my son, who's a music producer, doing drum and bass, garage and grime, and I've definitely got at least one album
Yeah.
cover, which
Everybody's got one. Everybody's got a story, at
and then
least. You know?
Smithy's record shop in Roman Road was also a big one for us in
There
Southampton.
you go. Everybody's got a record shop. Everybody's got a story.
Bring your mum a Tumby scratch 12-inch long. Yeah. So yeah, and so listen, guys, I'm just conscious of time. It's been fabulous. Like you, Lloyd was panicking, saying, "What are we going to bloody talk about?" Mate, massive as ever.
I
Always.
thought this was part of a panel. I didn't realise I'd be doing it by myself.
And
But I really
massive
ought to
thanks.
read emails properly, you know.
Well, I think everyone in the room's going to be down the exhibition at some point, mate. And
Yeah, do. I mean, yeah, do come down.
yeah, fantastic there. Right, so I can just from me and everyone, a massive thanks, Lloyd. Thank you, and I think really what I'm witnessing here is this sort of something Deborah touched upon.
Thank you guys for giving up your Monday evening
to celebrate, tell greater stories by celebrating their combined heritage, identity, and culture. So massive thanks to everyone in the room.
Yeah.
God bless you all. We've got an event next week. We've got our Find Your Cockney Roots Family Trees event. Also got
lovely.
a linguist talking about social accents and the prejudice that entail there. And Dalston on the 27th, we'll send an email around to everyone. We've got poetry for togetherness with a whole spectrum of people there, like, doing great stuff. So massive, massive thanks to everyone. And again, good luck for your exhibition, Lloyd. Lovely, mate.
Thank you.
And yeah, lovely to meet you all.
And yeah, Lloyd is fantastic. Really
Cheers,
enjoyed
Lloyd.
that.
Cheers, Lloyd. Cheers, Lloyd.
Thank you.
Take care, guys.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Deborah, be in touch. Take care. Take care, and Carly, take care.
Bye. See you.